to this section on climate resilience and landscape. We have a really good set of speakers and discussions for you today. So I think we're going to get started because I think we don't want to shortchange you for any of the time. Before I get started on this session on climate resilience and landscape, could I have the next slide? I just wanted to put in context that this is a series that we are running. We're calling it the PPCR Learning Series, but clearly it has a value beyond the PPCR. But sometimes I just want to take a moment to say what is the context in which we are also trying to promote, for example, through this session on climate resilience and landscape, why that is so important. So we really are working, myself, Juno, Kazi's over here somewhere, and we have the sixth colleague. And the PPCR is really a program that is through the Climate Investment Fund, and essentially it's a country-based program that really provides an opportunity for countries to mainstream climate resilience into all of their development planning process, and really to serve as the impetus for transformation at scale. And I think that is really the overarching objective of this. And the way it does this is it's not, it's beyond the project-based approach. What you're trying to do through that process is to come up with a coherent programmatic platform so that countries really have their sort of, deep strategic framework for climate resilience that is going to serve multiple purposes. And the idea here is their framework that really aligns with their national development process and puts them really on a trajectory for climate resilience in the current, medium, and longer term. And it should be then also responsive to any of the other global processes. This is really a very unique opportunity that through this program, which was already being rolled out in 18 countries, we have a fresh opportunity here to work with 10 more new countries. And so we're running this series really, and this is the third in the series. The first one was really looking at climate resilience and migration, because really there's a lot of movement of people in terms of displacement and mobility that happens. And during the ENR week, there was a whole session dedicated to that, and we had one earlier. And I think these are, so through this series, we try to bring dimensions to you that should be important in a national development planning context, which is of course relevant to the bank, to your country partnership framework as well. Next. Yeah, so I think today's session, I think we will hear from the speakers very shortly, how this landscape approaches really fit and inform and influence that kind of resilience planning that we're trying to instill at the national scale. We've all probably heard of landscape, and really I think it's another chance to hear from the experts, to hear about the case studies, and have a discussion on how we can inform this platform. And just as the last, I just wanted to just underscore some of the contributions. Several of the teams who are working on this program in the room. I see Christoph from Philippines, of course, Rwanda team is here, and I'm sure the others I might be missing you. So those are the 10 new countries, just for you to have in your mind. But everything that we learn here is really, I think, relevant across the institution's agenda. So then coming back to where we are today, we're going to have Paola, who's going to speak first, and I will introduce her very shortly, and then we're going to have Fabiano from Conservation International, and will be followed by Ling. So let me just introduce Paola. Paola is no stranger to a lot of us in the bank, but nevertheless, it's always important to share with you her sense of accomplishment. I think Paola has really been I think I remember her best from the agricultural livelihood that she really set, I think, a tone in the bank on how you bring in this multiplicity of users in the landscape approach. And I think that that experience that she's built, that she's taken it throughout the bank and was recognized as the global lead for resilient landscape. She's worked on a whole range of programs. Another one that I think is very much attributed to Paola in the recent years is the Terra Africa program that works across 26 sub-Saharan African countries. She also coordinates the multi-sectoral RED program. Interesting, because Conservation International, is the coordinator for the Forest Investment Program, the JEF program in Latin America. And she really is overseeing a whole portfolio of projects through this program, and has a PhD in economics from the University of California in San Diego, and a Master's of Arts in Economics and Social Sciences. So let me invite Paola to share with us her wisdom on the landscape approaches from many years ago.
Let me just sit there, and I'd ask you to move maybe, or do we have a signal?
Yeah, you are.
You have to.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, good afternoon to everybody. First of all, let me just take 1 second to focus, because I mean my morning has been very upset with this single process, and I want to ask to think it a few minutes. We had very dear colleagues, everything is fine, but they were going through Brussels, coming back from the GBN, and we always there for our work and practice school, right? So I wanted just to take a minute to think of what is happening and the resilience of this landscape and why this is happening. With that, let me just start to give you a couple of slides, just an introduction before the case studies come. So, next. We all know why we need to talk about resilience, what is happening with climate change. The World Bank just a few months ago published this new publication, the Shockwave, that really shows like how climate change adaptation and mitigation are going to affect the forest, and that something needs to be done. But among the many things that can be done, let's see, what can be done in the rural areas. So this is a map that was produced by WRI, UCN, and with some funding also from Forest. They show to you basically where you have opportunity for landscape restoration in the world. You can see it on the negative side and say this is degraded land, or you can look at it on the positive side and say this is a world of opportunity, 2 billion hectares of land that can be restored, that can be made more resilient, that can offer livelihood to people, that maybe will also contribute to them staying where they are and not need to migrate somewhere else. So 2 billion hectares of opportunity. But what would it take to transform these very vulnerable areas into more resilient areas? One of the tools, there are many tools, but one of the tools is the landscape approach. There are many definitions of landscape approach everywhere. There are some overlaps with watershed, with other kinds of spatial approaches. But one definition that we use at the bank and we use in South Africa, and that is widely used in the community of people working on landscape, is this one, is taking a geographical and socioeconomic approach to managing land, water, and forest. Basically, what we want is to connect protected areas, woodlands, other silvopastoral lands, croplands, irrigated lands, so from the top all the way to the bottom, to increase the productivity and the provision of ecosystem services, to really make this landscape more resilient. So the landscape approach really wants to connect production and what are some of the technology, and this comes from a publication of South Africa. These are some of the restoration technology. So what I want to show to you is that we can go from soil and water conservation technology, very much based on conservation agriculture, etc., all the way to agroforestry or reforestation efforts, afforestation. So it has a really wide range of technology that you can use. But this is nothing new. It was done before. But I want to show to you a very powerful 1 minute of what was done in terms of landscape restoration. I don't know how many of you know the case of the Lost Plateau. But let's just take 1 minute to remind us what can be done in terms of landscape restoration. This is is not the usual one used by the bank. Do we have audio?
No, unfortunately, we are not prepared for this. I'm sorry.
Oh, we don't.
Yeah.
Well. So I want to show to you, these are the images as it was before.
You just turn on.
And then.
Can you turn on the volume?
I can see what I can do here.
Yeah, we can turn on the mute now.
Yeah.
And they.
Great.
Okay. We have a fantastic, fantastic case studies of, this is mine?
Yep. Sorry, I briefly have to get back and stop the you, otherwise you will have to.
Just mute it again.
Yep.
Okay, well, where did it go? Okay. In the case of los plateaus, you know, many different technologies were used to restore this really landscape that looks at the moon, right? Watershed planning was incredibly important, terracing, you have seen it, vegetation, water and silt retention, both done, important ban on grazing management, a lot of things related to land tenure reform, community participation. So a lot of things, and that really had an impact in an area that was bigger than Kenya. What is happening now? Everywhere, thank you. There's a big movement in terms of restoration. As you know, as part of the bond challenges in New York Declaration, many governments, many countries have committed to more than 350 million hectares under restoration by 2030. Next one. In Latin America, there is an initiative for landscape restoration, which is Initiative 20 by 20. You see where we stand. We are actually even more than 20 million by now. Those are all the pledges from the different countries. Next one. What they want to do in Latin America, the cheapest form of restoration is to avoid degradation, correct? But then you have a lot of other things you can do. And one example taken, the next one, from the SLP Approach project, we have just an imagination. Degraded land, next one. What we want to do is to add vegetation, next one. Add more fences. And here is the SLP Approach project that Santa was talking about, where by adding all this vegetation, next one, you make not only the cattle more productive in terms of they are less stressed, they can stay in the shade, they produce more milk, and the farmer is gaining more money, so it's much easier. That's Latin America. In Africa, what we have done in all these years, with South Africa, which by the way, Christophe is the one who started South Africa in 2004. South Africa has really moved into the landscape approach into the last 10 years. A lot of analytical work related on how to get there, and 3 big programs. One for the Great Green Wall, another one which focuses on these three major drylands. And we have a lot of lessons learned from South Africa on really looking at resilience and landscape. One major piece of analytical work that was just completed and is being shared with everybody in Africa and here is this confronting droughts in African drylands, opportunity for enhancing resilience. It has been a work not only of the World Bank but of many CGIAR centers, many partners, and it's really shaping our engagement in drylands, in resilience, and in landscape approaches in the Africa region and beyond, to be honest. Why don't you look at the next one? The idea is that the drylands in Africa are going to expand due to the climate change. So from where we are now, it's going to go to expand a lot. Next. The report focuses on what can you do in all these different, subsectors, pastoral, irrigation, agriculture, tree-based systems. Those are all very good systems, but at the end of the day, you need to bring them together. So one of the cross-cutting approaches is the landscape approach, on how to bring all of this together. Next. So the key recommendation of this report is that really if you want to move from vulnerability to resilience, you need to invest in livelihood through all these elements that are looking at the landscape approach on safety net and in different alternatives. You might even invest in migration in certain cases. Next one. But investing in a landscape approach is an important element that comes out of this report as really looking at the triple win of higher productivity, climate resilience, and carbon sequestration. Next. In Africa, as also in Latin America, and I'm almost done, the governments under South Africa got together and the African Union endorsed the creation of the Africa Resilient Landscape Initiative in October last year, which was launched in Paris. And what is very interesting of his initiative is that it really tries to bring together, as you can see, the three circles: climate-backed agriculture, forest landscape restoration, and improved pasture management. The connectivity aspect to maximize the production of ecosystem services, to maximize the productivity of the land, is one of the things we're going to work on. One of the countries that is more advanced in this, let's look only at the 1 minute, right, with all the time, is Ethiopia. Let me just show to you what we have done, what Ethiopia has done. I don't know if there is anyone from Ethiopia here. Again, it's just a few days.
Sorry. No, only you. Sorry.
All right. So just to say that Ethiopia has done an incredible amount of work in the last 10 years and is really moving towards this landscape approach. If you now talk to the government, they talk about it, and South Africa has been supporting them. And now through these bigger initiatives that are initiative of the African Union, but supported by a lot of technical partners, including the bank, including many others, we hope to bring these experiences to our countries in Africa and outside Africa. and the substance.
Thank you. Thank you, Paola, and thank you for giving us a world tour on some of the landscape approaches that have worked successfully and that we can learn from. If anyone has any burning questions, I'll take them now. Otherwise, what we'd like to do is come back to the conversation afterwards. So let me pause 10 seconds. Okay. So let us then move to our next presenter. Thank you, Paola. And we have Fabiano. Fabiano Godoy is the technical advisor at Conservation International. He has worked there for 10 years, doing the conservation and field research. And he is the technical director of Conservation International's Carbon Fund team. And he's been developing and applying innovative scientific approaches that he will share with us today, looking at various aspects of the monitoring system and the landscape accounting system, both from the conceptual design and implementation of the sustainable landscape approach across CI's major geographies. Fabian is also the institution's expert on carbon emission reduction analysis, and he leads the RED project, so the red and the red, and there's more red in the room. REDD, okay? So let me invite Fabian, who has a bachelor's in cartographic engineering and a master's in sustainable development and conservation biology from University of Maryland. Thank you, Fabian. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes. All right. So, well, first of all, thank you for the invitation. I think it's a great opportunity for us to come here and explain a little bit what we are doing and our approach in terms of landscape. But also, for me, it's a good opportunity for to hear from you, to have like some comments, some feedback, because our goal is always to improve what we're doing and be more efficient on the ground. So I think that is a great opportunity for me as well. So I have a very short time, so I'm gonna start right away. But then I have to step back, and I'm so glad that my presentation is right after Paola, because she touched a little bit on this conceptual thinking about the landscape approach, and then more specifically sustainable landscape. But when we talk about sustainable landscape, yes, there is a huge spectrum of definitions, right? Some people, some scientists, they push more for the ecological process, some of them more for the social structure, right? So there is like this huge variety, right? But then when we think about an initiative, we have to set up a common ground, right? As the World Bank, or as she presented here, we have to create this definition. I don't call ours as a definition. I think I prefer to say that it's a description what we aim in terms of sustainable landscape, right? So here is our description of sustainable landscape, is where the natural capital is maintained or enhanced by promoting appropriate land use management. The resilience to climate change is improved, best practices are used in the production and planning, and local decision-making processes are included for the improvement of human well-being, supported by sustainable finance, right? So it's what everybody that works in the landscape approach kind of agrees is like, yes, there are several goals. There is this multi-functionality that we want to promote, right? But what we also agree is like, okay, we cannot win in all the situations all the time. So there are some trade-offs, right? So those are the situations that we want, but we also understand that sometimes we have to push more for this and less for that, because we cannot have like always win-win situations. For people that is more, yes. For people that is more visual like me, so this is the translation of that. Look, we have like those 5 pillars that support sustainable landscape, right? And then here, I just want to highlight some of the things, like when you say like promote natural capital is maintained and enhanced, yes, some of the resilience strategies or activities are part of this pillar. Some of them will be in the good governance when we identify what are the most vulnerable communities or the ones that is going to be affected first for the climate change and so on. Like the sustainable production, yes. So we want to apply the best practice, you know, which there is a lot of ecosystem-based adaptation activities. There is a lot of restoration, a lot of practice that goes aligned with the climate, the resilience to climate change. Right. And then here, the financial sustainability is, I think it's the piece where CI works a lot is because to promote a sustainable landscape, we have to think like long term, right? And then we have to have a portfolio of investments in that landscape that goes beyond the grant from a single donor or a multilateral donor, that goes beyond like the ecosystem, the payments for ecosystem mechanisms, you know, like RED and water schemes. They are great. They should be part of the portfolio, but it has to be some variety, right? And then here is where the private sector also should be accounted, right? So CI, when we implement those sustainable landscapes, we also work with the private sector to make their investments greener, aligned with the whole landscape approach, right? So here, the next step is just like some of the guideline principles. As I don't have much time, so I will just go over very quickly. But when we start working in a landscape, the first step that we do is to create a profile of the landscape, to understand very well what's going on over there. There is deforestation, there is degradation, who is doing that, how they are doing that, why they are doing that. There is the private sector, the enterprises, how ready they are for investment, what are the barriers for investment, what are the major enabling factors present over there. Also, in terms of the social structure, right? So we have like conditions for me, they are vulnerable, they are not vulnerable. So we have to understand very well all of these components, you know, to make a better decision. We have to understand what will be the climate conditions in a few years ago. So the sustainable land, the arable land, the suitable land for this crop or that crop will be in the same place. How that will affect. With this package of information is where we create what we call SIAP, Sustainable Investment Action Plan, which provides some guidelines, some kind of a work plan of investment in that land. Like what are the activities, what are the strategies that should be put in place. Right? Another thing that we always emphasize is multi-stakeholder participation. We want to have like the local stakeholders involved. So we create a lot of forums and a lot of roundtables to disseminate information, but also to get feedback from the field. Because it's always important to understand, like from the practical side, like the practitioners, how they implement things. What are the cultural things that you need to take into account when you're implementing this type of initiative, right? So CI always rely on partners to implement that on the ground. It's not because it's not only because we don't have the full capacity to implement everything that we want, but also we want to see that long term, right? So we want to see the initiative happening even after we exit, right? So creating this capacity on the ground, improving their knowledge, their conditions, that will increase the success of the project. And then continued improvement of monitoring and evaluation. There is a slide for that, so I'm going to skip for now. Here are those two pilot sites that we are working. Indonesia we started 5 years ago, Peru more or less like 3 years ago. As you see by the numbers, they are very different in size and population and also the players over there. I think this is just to very briefly give you an idea. The sites that we are working, there are like 2 other sites that we are in the planning phase, the conceptual phase, one in Madagascar and another one in Brazil. Next, please. So what I'm going to show here is like just some key results. As I said, like we have like this initiative that we are implementing those 2 landscapes, and then both initiatives they have several strategies, right? One is strategy for the crop producers, another strategy for the enhanced or protected the natural capital, and so on, so on. So here I'm just listing like some of the results that were achieved. I will try to highlight, because it's your interest, the one that is more linked with the climate resilience. right? So as I said, the Sustainable Investment Action Plan, we prepared for 3 districts in Indonesia and North Sumatra province. So this has led us to help the government on the spatial planning and the strategic environment assessment for North Sumatra province. For those who are very familiar with Indonesian government, so this is a big step. So this is like the footprint for their investments, for their land use planning and so on. So this is a huge achievement because the work that we have done, right? So we have been working with the private sector, with those oil companies, another policy framework that they implement over there. That is a very it was one of the mechanisms that we use under the natural capital. So we have these conservation agreements where we work with the smallholders, so basically provide some assistance. In exchange, they are committed to protect the forest or the land or the water or whatever is the natural resource they are using. So some of the results based on the practice that they are implementing in the field, so more best practice, that has been already led to some of the increase, and more advisory and because we want this long-term finance, so it's not only the production in the site that we want to improve, but all the value chain, right? So we want them to link to the market, and then the market also have to finance. So the same for Peru. Some of the results in Peru, we have one red project that is being verified and validated under the TCD. More than 4 million tons emissions reduced. We have over 800 conservation agreements, 2 co-ops that were created, implementation of 25 integrated farms, so shrimp and rice to mitigate exactly, to give them some opportunity in case of some extreme events or more some climate-related events here. They also been studying the shrimp to the high-end restaurants in Lima. I just have 30 seconds left, so I will skip all of these. I think the only one very important here is like the original opt for sustainable investment. So it's like the government already realized that it's so important to have this landscape approach, and then with looking with this green review that they set up this sustainable investment opt, that all the investments that we will channelize that province will go through the investment, right? So with all of these results, can we say that our landscape is sustainable? So then is where we came up with these 2, next slide, that basically, you can click one more. So we have these 3 pillars, that touch a little bit on our definition, and then we have we use them as criteria, and inside of the criteria we have like a lot of indicators that we measure how the landscape is performing against those indicators. So overall, we came up with this landscape sustainability index that shows more or less where they are doing good, where they are doing bad. So this is not like to say, hey, we're better than you and compare landscape, but it's more like because the indicators change from landscape to landscape, to exactly accommodate what the uniqueness of those landscapes. But the idea here is more to compare their evolution along the years, right? So the last slide is where we have all of this. Yes. So all of this information that I kind of for you here is also in our website. If you go there, you can check, and then you can download those dashboards and then all of that. I think our approach, the Sustainable Landscape Partnership, is just to conclude. I think we are learning as we implement it, but we see that it's very flexible, and then the landscapes that we have, they are very different from each other, and then can be is an approach that can be replicated in other areas. All right. I extrapolate 10 seconds.
Thank you, Fabiano. I'm sure you'll have a lot of questions, and I think that the last 2 slides and the scorecard will be very interesting to discuss, but to see how we bring that into the conversation, either at the start of the process of it or through the process. I think very interesting. Any burning questions, or should I move on? I think I'll move on. Okay, so we have next Stephen Ling. Stephen Ling is our Senior Natural Resource Management Specialist. I'm going to say from Africa region, but now it's not region, it's practice. And he has a PhD in Conservation Science and Spatial Bioeconomics. We work with EAP, the East Asian and Pacific region, on watershed and natural resource aspects under the Namchen 2 hydropower project. And he moved to the Africa region, he did, in 2009, and has been working on a variety of climate, land management, and river basin activities. Currently, he's the TCL of the Lake Victoria project and also the PPCR and SCRIP program in Rwanda, right? Yeah. Yes. Great. Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay, so the first thing to say is I'm recovering from a throat infection last week, so I hope my voice will hold out, but if I suddenly descend into some sort of crackly, squeaky mess, then you'll just have to look at the pictures. So we've had two presentations that have been sort of quite high-level, broad scope. I think my job here is just to sort of give a specific example of what we're doing in one project or area in Rwanda. And the project we have, which is financed by GF and LDCF, is called the Landscape Approach to Forest Restoration and Conservation. I don't know where the ecosystem is. LAFREC, so we have Landscape Approach in the title, which is why I get invited to these talks. Next one. So this is just quickly to give you a quick sort of geographical location for where we're working. This is northwest Rwanda, this is Lake Kivu, this border up here is where Congo starts, this is Easteni is Twin Goma. And we're working in this area here, which is along the Nile-Congo crest, the watershed between the Congo Basin and the Nile, immediately Lake Victoria Basin. And there's two remnant natural forest areas, which were forest reserves. The government's now interested in upgrading these to a national park. But most of this landscape is agriculture, and then there's some pasture land with some plantation forest up in this area. And the famous volcanoes with the gorillas where Diane Fossey studied is just a little bit north of here. Next slide. And so particularly the northern half of that area that I showed, there's been dramatic change in the landscape in the last couple of decades. This is the former Gishwati Forest Reserve, which was an extensive forested area. At least it was back in the 70s, but over recent decades into the 2000s, this has become reduced to this very small remnant natural forest area, which was the dense green slodge in the middle of the slide showed above, surrounded by agricultural and some pasture land, a little bit of plantation and forestry. And that's, of course, had an impact on the landscape, not just in that immediate area, but in surrounding areas. Without the forest cover, the land's more exposed to erosion. Rwanda is a very densely populated, very hilly country, so the fields there are generally pretty vulnerable. You see some pretty severe rill erosion on the slopes there that are being farmed, but also, small-scale natural disasters in terms of landslides and flooding. This area gets relatively high rainfall and is subject to flash flooding. And it's not just, us making those links, but the local people themselves make the links. I won't read out that whole thing, but if you can speed read while I have a quick glass of water, this is an account by a local farmer saying that, as they've seen the changes in the landscape, they see climate-related impacts there as well. Next slide. So what does the landscape approach actually mean? And this is a question that's sort of asked to me by often my counterparts. And I don't know what the textbook definition of the landscape approach is. Maybe Paola can give something. But for me, it's just a recognition of the fact that a lot of environmental services to develop them, to benefit from them, you can't just have sort of isolated activities or projects that work in small localized areas. You have to work at scale, and you have to work across different components of the landscape, and that's the key. And this is a compilation of photos showing some of those different components. We have the slopes down to Lake Kivu and the watershed areas there. You see cash cropping, tea plantation, subsistence farming. Those are fields of beans. You see the forest, the Gishwati National Forest, and the biodiversity. Gishwati still has a small population of chimps left in there.
Okay.
And, again, my counterparts say, what's the difference between a landscape approach and a watershed approach? And, for me, a watershed approach is a landscape approach. It's just a landscape approach where you define, because you're primarily interested in hydrological and watershed values, you define your landscape around the boundaries of the watershed. But if you want a landscape approach where you're focusing on, say, a population of large mammals, then you'll define your landscape in a very different way around, how they use the landscape. Or if you have, in this case, a landscape approach where you're looking at different things, you're looking at watersheds, forestry, biodiversity, then you'll draw the boundaries in a different way and include different elements. Next slide. So in practical terms, what are we doing in this area? Well, to start with, we have these two core forest areas, Gishwati and Mukura, which are being upgraded to a national park. So we're working on restoring that core natural forest into a better state. This photo is not very clear, but this is an area of secondary forest, which is being it's this extension area of Gishwati, which is being replanted, redeveloped, and hopefully will develop into more mature natural forest, like you see below, which is within the, it's around here in the center of this Gishwati area. Next slide. And then between and around these forest areas, also working in the surrounding landscape to improve the general micro-catchment management, sustainable production from the land, but also to increase the representation of forest elements within that landscape, including both agroforestry and protected forest strips along rivers, along ridge lines, along very steep slopes. Next slide. In the hope of moving to something like this, where you see a lot of steep but fairly bare slopes, to something a bit more like on the right-hand side, where you're seeing terracing with shrubs and grasses and some trees planted along the terrace rises to help protect them. You're seeing much more incorporation of agroforestry elements into the actual production landscape. Next slide. And also we have this area in Gishwati of pasture land, which is a relatively rare type of area within Rwanda. Next slide. And again, using the model from Colombia, the Silvo Pastoral Project there, where we actually had a study tour with some people from Rwanda and Burundi, aiming to introduce more forest elements, tree cover, forest protection of waterways and boundaries within that system, hopefully to try to increase the productivity as well as the environmental services. Next slide. But as well as the specific land-based approaches, we have other activities to complement and strengthen these, and particularly bring in more of the resilience aspect, the climate resilience aspect, and say the projects funded by GF and LDCF, and LDCF is specifically focused on resilience. And so the LDCF funding is mainly focused on livelihood diversification. If you have more activities and off-farm activities, you're less vulnerable to a lot of climate impacts, but also flood management, because as mentioned, this is an area that does suffer from flash floods. So we're doing modeling of the risk areas, setting up early warning systems, community response systems. Next slide. And this is the final slide. I just wanted to illustrate, I think this is, for me, an important point of landscapes as well, is if you're working at a landscape level, you're dealing with a whole range of different issues. It could be forestry, agriculture, maybe you're dealing with mining, certain industries, water resources, maybe water resources, investments. So you're dealing with a whole bunch of different stuff, and Fabiano also mentioned working with the private sector, which can be a whole different aspects on different crops and value chains. It's often very hard to do that within a single project, or to do it efficiently within a single project. So it's important, I think, for me at least, to try to build these programmatic approaches, to look at the opportunities to work with other partners and see how they can complement what you're doing within the same areas and the same landscape. And in Rwanda, the bank already has a lot of agriculture investments that do this kind of stuff, radical terracing on fairly steep slopes, and in a lot of very capital-intensive agricultural intensification and improving the productivity. So this is the Gishwati area again. These three areas are the target areas for the current phase of a large agricultural program that we have in Rwanda, so we agreed with them to target some of the areas around this landscape that we're working in to sort of get the synergy there. We have another project which we're putting together at the moment, a carbon finance project, which is very exciting as well, and particularly in terms of what this company is doing in Nyeri. They're trying to replace charcoal cook stoves in the towns in Gisenyi or Rubavu, the town that you saw on the border with Congo, with more efficient cook stoves which run off a compressed biomass pellet, and are having great success, which we hope to support through carbon financing, in replacing charcoal cooking in these urban areas, and therefore reducing the demand for charcoal and wood products from the surrounding landscape. And that's it for me. I think the next slide is just a thing.
Thank you, Stephen. That was really good. I think coming in as one country and seeing what's happening down to the smallest piece of land, I think is very good. And again, I'm sure we'll come back to the question. So at this point, I really advise the speakers who've been disciplined by Dominic and done an awesome job. That's going to leave us a lot of time for conversation. But before we go into that, I'd like to invite Carol. Carol is the global lead on forest, and she's had 20 years of experience in NRM in developing countries as a double majors in agriculture, economics, and ENR. And she has managed complex natural resource management operations in various regions, including in the Congo Basin and in the Latin American countries. And really, she has focused on the intersectoral dimension, which I think is really important in the context of landscape. And particularly through her experience in Cameroon and Tunisia, she's going to share with us some of her thoughts based on the discussion we're having on climate resilience and landscapes, and also from the perspective of the speaker's point. What do you have?
Well, thank you, Kenta, and I was also requested to be very short so we can have maximum time for the discussion. So thank you to the presenters. I think it gives a very good overview of the potential for the landscape approach and what it can bring in terms of benefits. But I would say that my question and the way that I would like to frame my discussion is that, okay, if everything is so nice, talking about the triple win, and why didn't it happen earlier? So because we mentioned that it's better for environment, it's better for people, it's better for the economy, but still, in many cases, we can still see that it's not adopted at large scale. There are some other examples where we can see it can be, but just discussing the Colombia, I happen to be one of the TTLs of this project, and it all looks very nice in terms of the production, the livelihood and everything, but we're still struggling to get more participants to the project. So we need to have a more holistic manner to look at the landscape approach and what it takes to get there. And maybe there are a few things that I would like to share and to react from the presentation. I think we need to get the science right. So we have a lot of case studies and different projects that shows that it can be done. And but we need to have it in a very systematic manner, really to create this knowledge body that will really inform intervention at a larger scale. And it's even more important when we are working in a climate changing environment. So we need also to work on modeling exercise and to really have a better understanding of what are the good solutions, because you can't replicate from one country to another or even from one region to another. You really have to adjust the different solutions to the different specific sites. So this requires a lot of understanding, science, and knowledge to really make it work. So that's the first point on the knowledge part. Second, I think we need to extend a little bit the community to whom we are talking to. It's very great to discuss amongst ourselves and to all congratulate ourselves about the great things we're doing. But when we're talking to country directors, there are still some of them that are asking, why are you talking about landscaping? So they don't understand landscape. So we can spend hours talking about definitions, but we also need to understand that there are many people who have absolutely no clue. So we need to find ways to better communicate and to really access those who have really the decision-making power, ministries of finance, ministries of planning, our country directors internally, and so we can really speak the language they understand. So I don't think we're yet there. And so we absolutely need to find ways to be able to communicate that. Then I think it was mentioned in different presentations, the need to move away from a project-by-project approach. We need to have a programmatic approach, and that means a lot of things. We need to be able to bring together the different instruments, so we can work with the different line ministries. We can have a good understanding of what we are doing at the planning or finance ministries. We also need to use the different sources of financing. It can be private, and a lot will be coming from private. But how we can channel the resources from the private sector in a way that will contribute to the landscape approach. So there is a lot of work to be done at the regulation or at the law level that we can influence. So we need to see what are the different entry points so that we influence the different actors and the different behaviors. We need to use also better the different instruments that we have available. We have the investments that we are using quite a lot in this kind of areas, but we should be using more of the DPLs because a lot is about policy, a lot is about having the regulations right. So I know that there are examples in East Asia about having DPLs part of the climate change agenda, so we need to be able to use that. We also have an opportunity because most of these activities related to resilience also have a benefit in terms of carbon and greenhouse gases emissions. So we also need to use the climate finance, the carbon finance, and to complement as part of the financial package, so we can really bring different instruments together to really tackle this agenda. So I think in a nutshell, and just to summarize and not take too much time, we need to have the science right and to continue working on bringing the evidence that we so much need to really be influential in the way we are presenting the potential of the landscape approach. We need to expand to whom we're talking to, and so that it becomes more understandable by all the different decision makers that it is an important area. And we need to have the financial architecture right and really using all the different instruments that are available so that we can really make an impact and go at scale. So that would be my intervention.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Carol. I think that's really setting the stage nicely for the conversation, I think, because what we really want to understand here is how do we make it work in practice. And I think understanding, the things that Carol is raising in terms of what are the barriers, what are the bottlenecks, and what are some of the opportunities that we can unfold. I'm going to open it up in a minute, but I do want to give each of the speakers 2 minutes to sort of respond or to touch on anything that Carol has raised. You'll have more opportunity once the conversations are going. But just, I think, as a first sort of a response to Carol. So, Paola, over to you first.
Okay. Need for science. This is just more of a request, of a plea than anything else. It's, in our sector, we don't do enough impact evaluation. Try in all your projects to really make sure you have an impact evaluation. It's a little bit of an invest. I hope everybody knows what it is. You're basically looking at a project area where you will have your project and an area that's called the control. And you need to do all sorts of survey at the very beginning to understand what is the situation, and then maybe in mid-term of your project, and at the end you will see the impact. It's a very it's a long, a difficult thing to design this survey and to look at the econometrics behind it, etc. But it's the only way we can show if we have impact. So that's my first request. Plus, there are many more scientific approach to it, but at least that one shows the impact of our project. I'm very interested in hearing from the scorecard as well, because it's another way, maybe simpler, to also look at that. The second is, lately I'm having more success in talking to people that are not familiar with the concept of a landscape approach when I talk about landscape restoration. Nobody turns to me and say, what are you doing landscaping? No, it's like people are understanding the two words together, landscape restoration, moving from degraded land into a restored land as something that is very probably very understandable because I see that I'm receiving a lot of interest, and people get it from the ministry to the country director. So I think that's interesting, and under it you can do a lot of other things that you used to do. The financial mechanism, well, I think that yes, of course, we need to put together all the things that we have, so that the sum of all these different instruments, the total is more than the sum of the individual parts, and we make sure that they can really connect, and we should sell them as a package also, again, both to facilitate the life of the countries and also inside the World Bank, having it as a package.
Good. Thank you, Fabiano.
Yes, no, I think Carol touched on like very good points, and I would say that from all of the three, which is not easy to implement, but I think to get government buy-in is it's not the hardest, but it's the one that is going to take longer. If you don't have the government on board, you can do great things, but that will be very unstable long term. So if you have the government taking your approach or your initiative as part of their development plan, I think that you are making a very good path to make that approach last long. And then just to research on the scorecard, what I showed to you guys here is just the scorecard. It's kind of a fact sheet style, you know, front and back and front and back type of page. But we also have in our website a little bit more breakdown of the information, because when we were collecting that, we realized, hey, we have much more information that we can draw other conclusions and help the decision makers to align their investments or align their strategies and so on. So we provide that to the user, to whoever is implementing the approach in the field, to get like more information and be able to make better decisions, right? Including a kind of a GIS web mapper where you can visually do like some conclusions. And then, but I think one of the important things on this monitoring is like everybody wants to do, but nobody puts like any funding aside to do that in the beginning. And then I think that is like a huge caveat for us to learn. You know, like every single project should have like a M&E component, and then should have like some funds devoted to that. What we developed was, by request, they said, hey, Fabiano, can you develop a framework that is robust enough to be credible, but simple to be understandable by local stakeholders? Can you implement something that is not very costly, right? Because we don't have money, that's everybody. But at the same time, you know, using using data that is available out there that can draw like very good conclusions and make sure that we are creating this, we are demonstrating the impact in that landscape. Right? That landscape, that scorecard doesn't go deep attributing like or giving the attributes to CI. Or CI is responsible for this impact, or the other organization is responsible. But that scorecard and that framework shows like, hey, this is the impact in the overall. And I think this is more important than see like what is the attribution for each organization, but like the overall contribution results to that. So that's my point.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, I think the main point that Carol was raising is one that certainly sort of occurred to me and perhaps others that work in this sector, that we have our nice presentations with sort of pictures of smiley farmers and areas being greened, and we talk about win-wins or win-win-wins or win-win-win-win-win. But if it's so good and so easy, why do we even have to make an effort? Why is it just being taken up? And I've certainly sort of struck me, and I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that we talk about these multiple benefits of water and biodiversity as well as productivity, but at the end of the day, it's the individual farmers who make choices about how their land is used, and those guys are often in a position where they're very risk averse, they're very, unable to make substantial upfront investments, and a lot of these things take several years to develop, and you have this sort of coordination problem that because impacts happen at a landscape level, if one guy is doing it, but his neighbors aren't, then you don't get the same kind of impact. So we have to think very carefully about, not just how to make this work at a broad level or a public good level, but how to make it work for the individual farmers and make sure that the incentives are stacked up right for those guys. And then, institutionally, the bank, we have an issue as well because, if I'm the country director sitting there and the roads people come to me and they say, hey, we can build 100 kilometers of road and we know exactly how much it's going to cost. We have a pretty exact time schedule of when this is going to be delivered. We have an economic model that says how much, trade is going to increase when we finish this section of road and the number of people who will benefit, and we can disperse $300 million over the next 5 years. That sounds a lot more encouraging than, well, hey, we have this area, it's going to be a long-term program. The first sort of 3 to 4 years are really just getting the government to understand it. We won't disperse much. Beyond that, we'll sort of start to scale up a bit. But, after sort of 10 to 15 years, we're probably looking at sort of, big-scale investments. And it's kind of difficult to quantify exactly how much it's going to cost or exactly what the benefits will be, but, we'll hope there be some, and we'll do some work on monitoring alongside it as well, so we will have an idea in about 8 years what the benefits will be. That's a hard sell, and even if you do sell it, because it's a long-term program, our country directors change every 3 years, and then someone else comes along and they want to throw out the existing portfolio so they can sort of stamp their imprimatur on the new portfolio, and you go through the same struggles all over again. So, we have a problem sort of committing to these kind of long time scale, slow burn kind of programs. Even GF, which should know better because they're there for environmental activities, has or at least, had the same kind of issues, and that, we don't do repeated projects, after 5 years we expect everything to be perfectly sustainable, ad infinitum. So, that's a struggle from a donor perspective as well.
No, all excellent points, and we're going to open up for questions right now. And I think you've heard from the speakers, you've heard some challenges, you've also now heard some very practical considerations that kick in. And we have 15 people online and a couple of questions coming in. I'm going to take a couple of questions here, read a couple of questions, and then open it back to a discussion, okay? Yuka.
Hi, I'm Yuka Makino. I'm in the Climate Change Disaster Risk Management Unit in South Asia region. GPCR. We don't have South Asia, so it's GPCR, I guess. First thing I want to say is I'm very excited that we're talking about landscape because I might be one of the few people in the bank actually with a degree in terrestrial ecosystem management and I'm very happy that the bank is finally talking about landscape approach. So that's what I want to, but there are 2 points I want to raise. And I think Stephen mentioned in his presentation, but it was missing from Fabiano's presentation is integrating disaster risk management or disaster risk assessment in your 5 pillars that you were doing in your assessment. You mentioned everything else except the potential. He mentioned flooding, I guess because his landscape involved, floods and stuff like the flash floods. But that part seemed to be missing, or maybe I missed it. So I think that's one of the things we need to consider. And why I raised that point is my second hat that I wear in the bank is I use the landscape approach. A lot of the presentations today was on agricultural and rural landscape, and I used the landscape approach on road sector projects, something that Stephen has mentioned. And it's because, particularly in the Himalayan region where I work in, glacial lake outburst floods happen a couple hundred kilometers way up there, but destroy all the roads downstream. So we have to look at the entire landscape instead of, because in road sector, we tend to look at the 50 kilometers we're building, or we tend to look at just that little strip and within 1.5 meters from the road. But we really need to see how the whole landscape is, because toe cutting at the bottom of the slope might be actually causing the road to fall, so it increases maintenance costs. So I think it's interesting to also put that approach and put that on the table of how, in the bank, particularly if we're investing $300 million, as Stephen said, to actually apply this approach to different sectors. So that's another point I wanted to raise on the table.
No, I think that's a very interesting point. I think we are struggling with how to sell this to CDs and CMUs, and maybe we need to change the conversation. One was about terminology, two was the entry point, but let's put that. Any other questions or comments? Please introduce yourself.
Mark Fulmer, I'm the Director of Rwanda Research, which is focused on climate change adaptation. Our fields like are, interestingly, the US and the UK predominantly at the moment. So I can pick up on a point that Carol raised. Getting the science right indicates that the science is wrong. That's a really interesting and potentially quite provocative thing to say. The data collection and the data that is out there is one thing. The interpretation and how it comes together is something else. And what we are seeing at the moment is an absolute revolution in the amount of data that's being collected. And I think one of the things that is really coming out is that we are now beyond the point of identifying previous analogs. So when you use the word restoration, the implication is that you're attempting to put a landscape back to how it was at some previous time, whatever you've chosen that to be. Across the sciences, there is an indication that we're really beyond that point now, and that we need to think forward. So if I can connect for a moment with Fabiano, your approach, really to say, with your scorecard, how are you matching your stores to the rate of innovation and adaptation that is needed when you look at the trends out to 50 and 100 years that the probabilistic models are producing with the uncertainties that go with it? Because that connects to the previous questions, to do with risk, and very much goes to the heart of how people are responding and behaving, both at the decision-making level and at the implementation.
Great, thank you. Let me read you. There's a couple of questions coming from the from those who are online, and then we're going to come back to the speakers to hear what how they want to respond to this point. First question is there any work on integrating these larger regional landscape initiatives with urban green infrastructure, especially at the urban fringe? I don't know who that question comes from. SD, okay. Now the second question, on tricky integrated landscape financing, science right is important but not enough. But it also must inform the nature of financing. How can we find ways to get donors or investors to align their interests towards outcomes that do not necessarily lend themselves to attribution? I think you talked a little bit about, Fabiano, that the scorecard is not attributed to the CI, but that means financing as well, I think is a question. So I think with that, unless there's any one more question I can take from this room, but I'm going to open it to the speakers, okay? Go ahead. Should we just go around and you can choose to answer what you want to answer?
Okay, let me start. On having as an entry point not only the rural agriculture sector, but other sector, I actually had a very interesting conversation with our safeguard director, Bilal Rahil, saying, can, all the work that our team are doing on safeguard and looking at the roads and looking at will lead to have more of a, using the landscape approach also for that. And we are discussing that it could be, in certain cases, a good idea, especially in this safeguard plus mode that we are. So I think it's an excellent point. I myself have been global landscape lead for 1 year. So at the moment, I'm still very focused on the closer brothers in terms of the agriculture, the water, the sewer. But I should also start opening it up to the other ones, certainly. In terms of the urban infrastructure, okay, so the landscape, again, the landscape approach / territorial approach can include small, you can define the landscape as you want. So certain urban centers that are maybe in rural areas are definitely part of it. The interaction between urban and rural is fundamental. So inside the work that I'm doing, it's just really initial. So we are trying to go step by step, and but we are really in a discussion also with SWOR on how to integrate this and under more of a landscape and territorial approach. So we are moving there. And in terms of attribution, I think that we should, you know, you can have an impact on a landscape. The impact evaluation allows you somehow to single out if you can say that that is attributable to your project. So that's why I'm insisting in trying to have that. I think it's going to be very difficult for the bank to only go jurisdictional without an attribution all the time to what we've done, but certainly in certain programs we have that, like there is not a strict correlation between our new carbon funds and what we land in that at the end at the national level or jurisdictional level. It's amazing.
Thank you, Paola. And I think as the rest of you answer, I think I also would like you to think about, you know, what are the 2 or 3 things that task teams should be sort of keeping as back pocket advice, you know, to break through this sort of impasse, right? That it's not scalable and it's complicated. And I think the things that came up, and Stephen put it very nicely, because I think, you know, from the perspective of the client, there is also a confusion. You know, we talk about landscape, we talk about watershed, we talk about ecosystem based. I mean, and I think what is the boundary of this landscape that we're talking about? Does it not have to be defined? It's sort of iterative. I think just to keep those things in mind as well. Stephen, we'll go back.
See, we're fast losing the audience. I'll speak quickly. Just to pick up on a couple of points. I mean, I don't know if it was the precise point that's been made over there, but in terms of, you know, not going back to previous landscapes, but thinking forward. I mean, with climate change, you know, this is going to be a key thing, and particularly when we're looking at sort of natural landscapes or biodiversity, or trying to think what is a natural landscape in the context of climate change. You know, what was there in the past is maybe not what can be supported in the future, and it's a point I've made before in other forums, but you know, part of the challenge of climate change is going to be, I think, investing hugely in restoration ecology expertise, which is something that, you know, there's a few of us who are ecologists and have terrestrial ecology backgrounds, but there's not that many people, and not many people work in the applied aspects of it because it's not that sexy. You know, it's not often sort of cutting-edge science. You know, wetland restoration, there's some body of knowledge there, but in terrestrial ecosystems, it's very, very difficult. So that needs looking at in a much more serious manner. And the point that was made about attribution, I think that was trying to say more sort of succinctly and eruditely kind of what I was trying to put across with the, you know, hypothetical CD and the road project. But you know, that's a nice kind of clear-cut engineering piece of work, whereas what we're trying to do is much more fuzzy and it's much more open-ended, and it's very difficult to be specific. You know, our contribution, others. And, you know, that's going to remain a challenge. You can't sort of just sidestep that. But, you know, working on the country directors and other decision makers, bringing them out to areas to see the kind of things that we're talking about directly is often very effective because they don't have a very good conceptual model of it. But if you know, show them communities that are happily talking about, you know, that stream that used to flow, or the, you know, the stop flowing, but then because of these interventions, it started to flow again, and what that means to their lives, then they start to sort of grasp it. But also this point about how we can piggyback on other projects and programs, and on some of the sort of hard infrastructure that, you know, they perhaps feel more comfortable with. You know, that's important. It's not just safeguards. I mean, my own career, as you mentioned, I started in the bank working on Namtern 2 hydropower project and working on the watershed catchment management part of that, investing in managing a 4,000 square kilometer protected area for the value that it added to the hydropower project. You know, in Rwanda, I mean, we're trying to sort of piggyback on the much, much larger investments we have in the agricultural sector. sort of showing the complementarity between that and some of these, more specific sort of forest element activities we have. Lake Victoria also mentioned we're trying to piggyback on a lake transport project and saying, look, if you're developing the transport infrastructure, you need to sort of think about the impacts both of this on environment, but also the impacts of environment on the transport infrastructure and climate change and lake level change. You don't want to build a big port and then find in 20 years' time your water levels drop by 3 meters and the port's like 200 meters from where the water is. So there's, and I mean, the safeguards, mentioning roads, anytime you're doing linear infrastructure, and I'm not sure we do always do this systematically, but you need to look at the broader landscape, not just necessarily the impacts on the roads, but also the other way around. I mean, if you're building a road or a railway line across the steppe of Central Asia, and you're putting a fence along that, you're not just affecting, that very small air parcel of land, you're affecting, migratory patterns of large ungulates over millions of square kilometers, and that's something, I mean, I've worked on power line projects as well, where the same thing, the impact they have on bird movements, particularly, certain species of bird was, important to a much greater area than the actual physical footprint of that infrastructure. So, we have to be aware of the risks, but also then, turning around the opportunities to leverage some of these things for broader landscape investments.
Right. Fabiano?
All right, so let's start with this feature prediction, how we incorporate that. Yes, we do incorporate some of these in our scorecard, mostly when it comes to the productivity, but maybe not as much as we should. The way that we see those scorecards is in the dashboard, like, it's our tier 1, right? As we implement and then as we are doing things on the ground, we feel the necessity, the need to collect more information, to do more modeling, to do this and to do that. And then is where you go to tier 2. And I think that is how we should approach the problem, right? We cannot have like everything well done very precisely at the beginning, but as we move along, we see what is exactly the needs to improve and to do that. That's part of I think the most important, like, we have to provide information for the managers, right? So for them to adapt their initiatives, their strategies, and then improve along the way. So that is the one that I see. But yes, we do not, or no, we do not incorporate as much as we should. So, and then regarding the landscape, I think there is a very good point here, like the boundary of the landscape, right? So we touched a little bit, but when we talk about the boundaries, yes, we have to have like delineation, right? But when we are analyzing that landscape, we should, those boundaries should be very flexible, right? When we analyze the disaster, for example, we have to go away or very far to get all the elements, right? If the boundary is not a watershed, but we want to put it in the water as one of the components, we have to go to the watershed, the catchment. So there's like some flexibility. The two projects that I show over there, the two pilots, one is the watershed, the delegation, and the other is districts, right? But our experience on the ground told us that when you come to intervention and when you come to the monitoring, the political boundary makes much more sense, because it's where you have the policy framework, is where all the data is collected. So for us to create the scorecard for the watershed, it was harder than the other one. And the same, like, remember that I mentioned that the government of San Martin created this investment, the sustainable investment office. So the intervention that they're going to do will follow over the watershed, but also to the whole province of San Martin. So in that sense, we are already talking to the government, and we're going to develop a dashboard for the whole San Martin to be able to capture that better, right? So yes, those points. I forgot the last.
that was the attribution question.
Okay.
Does anybody have any last question, or I would like to sum up here? Great. Thank you all. I think this was a really, really useful discussion, and it reminds me, Yuka and I, maybe some others here, were here at the ecosystem-based adaptation conversation last week as part of the GM Gender Business Week. And I think there's a lot of convergence in these different conversations. But I think I'd just like to end up with a few, I can't summarize the richness of what the presenters have put, but I think what we all heard was that, the landscape approaches are working. They're working in different places. I think the challenge, as Carol put out, I think we need to pay a little bit more attention and understand why something is working in a certain place and how can we make it work in another place. And everyone has sort of said that it's not something you can replicate and instantly scale up. There is a lot of customization and local context that matters. I think getting the buy-in of the government or the key stakeholders and decision makers is really important. And it reminds me of the Ethiopia program, which I think is very interesting. It works very well with the agricultural, water landscape. And interestingly, under the PPCR, they are using that based on government buy-in at the highest level. Mary is here from the Ethiopia program. The buy-in from the Ministry of Finance and the sectoral agencies to now scale that up as a multi-sectoral plan that is not just agriculture and water, bringing in now energy and ag, water, energy, and I think there's some linkages with the road conversation as well. So I think because of that success at a smaller scale, there is a buy-in now that is being institutionalized. So I think those are the successes that we want to build on. I think in terms of the boundary question, I think what is nice is I think Fabian had and I'm sure there are other frameworks out there, but having a framework would always help with the conversation, I think, with the client and having scorecards, but recognizing that these still need to have the level of flexibility. The boundary, I think you put it very nicely, you can have a natural landscape boundary, but when it comes to the monitoring and the sustainable financing, maybe it makes sense to have it, in an institutional context. I think this is the kind of flexibility. I wanted to come back a little bit about the conversation that we need in terms of selling this as a concept. I think both to our clients, and we'll talk a little bit about that, but both secondly, internally, and Paola is obviously leading this conversation. And I think how we go from the sort of the sectors we work with familiarly on the sort of natural resources side to really now bring in the hard sectors, I think that Yuka was raising. And I think we have a real opportunity here at the ecosystem-based conversation last week. I think Gregory was very interested. How do we now work with the road sector to take that landscape approach? I think Stephen highlighted, the multiple dimensions, but make that much more of a concrete conversation because roads sell, schools sell, hospitals sell. How do we change that conversation using a sort of a more compelling, entry point to the conversation with our management internally. And I think, last of all, I don't want to forget the science question. I think that was a very important part of the conversation. I think that having that science-based, evidence-based conversation coming in can really help us to set up, I don't know whether the scorecard sets up targets a priori or it's something that evolves as part of a monitoring process, but I think having that conversation up front is quite important, recognizing that not only that we are trying to adjust the landscape to respond to climate impact, but the landscapes themselves are impacted, I think, associated by climate change. And so it's really a dynamic process, and I think we need, as people who work in this, to convey this. It is a little complex, but it is important. We don't live in linear societies. We don't live in linear, processes anymore. So these, I think, were some really important messages and conversations. So I thank very much the speakers, Paola, Fabiano, Stephen for taking the time, and Carol for her discussant's role and for raising the bar on the conversation. But I also want to thank Juno, who's really been reaching out to all of you to put this in place, Dominic, who's been painfully working very hard at the back, and two other people, Paola, my colleague who's not here, and Roman, our IT person who gets all of this set up with this. With that, thank you all for coming, and it was a really good conversation. Thanks to those who are online, We will keep this conversation going. We will have the next learning series, which is going to be focused on climate resilience and innovation. And I urge you to come there because here we are talking about innovation that involve the IT world, that involve the insurance world, that involve the private sector, things that we can design into our programs and our projects that can really reach out, whether it's crowdsourcing or whatever. So I think that's our next session on the innovation. So thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I guess we continue with the other meeting. I can get something to
Are you saying Carol for the way to find I don't have much time when
We should ask them also because of the ENC work.